With Election Day fast approaching, neither Donald J. Trump nor Kamala Harris can afford to make any mistakes. Yet, the Trump administration has just made a crucial mistake and then doubled down with another one. Altogether, the situation for the Republican nominee appears bleak. Here's everything we know so far. Donald Trump kept rally-goers waiting for hours while he recorded a podcast. As far as podcasts go, there isn't one bigger than the Joe Rogan Experience with none other than Joe Rogan, of course. However, as far as disasters during the run-up for U.S. presidency in 2024 goes, there couldn't be one bigger than one that Trump just witnessed, or orchestrated depending on how you view it. Podcasts have taken over the social landscape around the world, but particularly in the United States, where there's a platform for ever discourse. Of course, Kamala Harris sat down for a podcast as well. She sat down with Alex Cooper on the equally as prominent Call Her Daddy podcast. Trump's rebuttal was one with Rogan, arguably something that was needed to further his political campaign, given the social nature of the U.S. election. However, while new PR strategies have always been appreciated, it does not negate the very real relevance and impact of a good old political rally. On October 26th, Trump's campaign organized a political rally in Michigan, which just so happened to clash with the date of his podcast with Rogan. However, the timings were supposed to work out for the U.S. presidential, hopeful to be able to make it for both events. The podcast ran late, and Trump supporters were reportedly left freezing in the cold for almost 3 hours while they waited for him. Meanwhile, to add insult to injury, the Harris campaign set up its biggest Democratic rally yet, with an estimated 30,000 attendees. The rally was a hit, with Harris taking center stage and receiving celebrity endorsements left and right. Trump supporters, on the other hand, felt their support for the Republican nominee waning, as he seemingly chose to prioritize the podcast over the Michigan rally. How could Trump's tardiness impact the outcome of the November 2024 election? The late October 2024 rally was not the first one in history where a political speaker has run late. It was also not the first of Trump's rallies where he arrived later than scheduled. To be fair, Harris hasn't always been on time for all of her rallies either. There's always some leeway when it comes to scheduling, and rally-goers expect some delays, an hour at most. What makes Trump's tardiness all the more critical is the fact that it happened with less than 3 weeks to go till the presidential vote. Adding to that, Michigan is widely considered a swing state, and historically, swing states determine the outcome of any presidential election. They're also known as battleground states, where campaigns aggressively set up rallies, bring up support, and anything of that sort. Trump's rally, for example, was to be held at an airport tarmac, with Trump arriving from a direct flight from Austin, Texas. That would have also been where he'd taped his podcast episode with Rogan. Texas saw a lot of political activity that day, whereas Michigan saw quite less by comparison, as Harris's star-studded rally with Beyonce in attendance was also held in the red state. Key points mentioned in Harris's speech tackled the state's abortion ban. Abortion in itself has been a hotly contested topic in the run-up for presidency, with Trump and Harris on opposite ends of the discourse. Many of Trump's supporters left before he even got there. Trump's podcast with Rogan was released just a few hours after he landed in Michigan. The Republican nominee apologized to the supporters who'd stayed, noting that the podcast ran later than he'd anticipated. However, when Trump didn't show up at 7:30 as expected, a sizable number of his supporters started to get uncomfortable in the freezing cold. It was after a few minutes of waiting that the Trump campaign posted a message on the social platform X, noting that Trump had just left for Michigan. For context, there's a 2-hour flight time between the two states. The message was supported with a video message from Trump himself, urging his supporters to stay there as he was on his way. Trump apologized for the tardiness again, and stated that everyone would have a good time at the rally in a bid to make up for the delay. Regardless, many of his supporters started to pack up and leave, noting that it was freezing on the tarmac. Trump eventually took the stage at the Traverse City Airport, where temperatures dipped to about 10 degrees Celsius. The crowd erupted into cheers as video screens showed Trump's plane arriving, and then him walking off his plane and down the steps. "I am so sorry," he said. "We got so tied up, and I figured you wouldn't mind too much because we're trying to win." The supporters who stayed claimed it happens. Doug Burgum, the Republican governor for North Dakota, kept the crowd busy as they waited for Trump. Reporters, however, noted that the crowd seemed disengaged after a while. The crowd that stayed had huddled together with blankets to stay warm. Then, by the time former Republican gubernatorial nominee Tudor Dixon took over stage, the crowd seemed visibly agitated. To keep everyone interested, Trump campaign workers threw hats at the crowd, crowd, reported facts about the rally, and anything to keep the limited number of people who'd stayed behind at the airport long enough for the Republican nominee's arrival. Despite the delay, a few of Trump's supporters who'd reached the tarmac at around 4 claimed that they had no regrets about the wait. Several of the campaigners believed that delays were understandable, and they didn't hold it against the Republican nominee. If anything, a few of the attendees were only disappointed with the fact that Trump missed out on a larger crowd. Was a podcast with Joe Rogan really necessary? An interesting fact to consider here is that Rogan and Trump haven't always had the best relationship. In the run-up for the 2024 presidential election, the podcaster and presidential nominee have butted heads on more than a few occasions. Rogan once claimed that he would never allow Trump on his podcast after Trump had attacked him for endorsing his political rival. That rival, however, was not Kamala Harris, but Robert Kennedy Jr. Rogan claimed that he resonated with a lot of Kennedy Jr.'s points, which irked Trump. Interestingly, Kennedy Jr. was brought up during the podcast, with Trump claiming that he'd bring the former presidential hopeful into his administration, probably in health or something. Other topics that came up included federal income taxes, the Taiwanese mob, and the Chinese president, whom Trump called a brilliant man. The bigger question, however, was posed after the podcast, with many arguing whether a lengthy discussion with Rogan was even necessary, especially since the Trump campaign seemingly gave the podcast more precedence over the Michigan rally. According to some experts, the podcast was the smarter choice, although an even smarter choice would have been to reschedule the Michigan rally completely. As it currently stands, a majority of Trump's supporters are young men, and a majority of Joe Rogan's listeners fall into that demographic. Was the podcast really necessary? Yes. The Joe Rogan Experience was a good move for Trump's campaign. Trump talked about everything from the Taiwanese mob to the existence of UFOs. Trump's episode was a highly anticipated event, and in the lead up to its release, there had been rumors swirling around that Harris might also be in the studio that day. Rogan claimed that he wanted to host a presidential debate between the two, especially since Trump and Harris haven't had the chance to conduct a proper debate since Harris replaced Biden as the Democratic nominee. In any event, Harris's team declined Rogan's invite, and the podcaster continued with only Trump. The interview was posted around 10 and ran for 3 hours. Trump restated much of what he said during the 2024 campaign, conspiracies committed against him during the 2020 campaign, the war in Ukraine, and restating that Harris and incumbent President Joe Biden were a bigger threat to national security than foreign foes. Trump also dropped a major headline for the press when he stated that this would be his last election. The rest of the podcast touched on a multitude of topics, including the Republican nominee's apparent hatred for traditional media outlets. Trump, in line with his claims against the media for perpetuating fake news, claimed that many mega outlets had it out against him and his campaign. He noted that fact-checkers would listen in more closely to anything he had to say, letting his political rival say anything without any recourse or, in this case, fact-checking. To Trump's credit, while many of his statements have been disproved by the media, so have several of Harris's. Cause of concern on the horizon, how a tasteless Puerto Rican joke could derail all of Trump's hard work. Tony Hinchcliffe sparked backlash with a racist joke about Puerto Rico during a Madison Square Garden rally for Trump just before the election. Testing the joke at a New York comedy club the night before, Hinchcliffe called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Despite an awkward response from the audience, he repeated the quip at Trump's event, where it was condemned by both Latino communities and Trump supporters. Trump distanced himself, claiming he didn't know Hinchcliffe, despite the comedian's large following and involvement at the rally. Reports indicate Trump's campaign tried vetting Hinchcliffe's routine, but sources suggest some offensive lines were ad-libbed. The incident triggered a political crisis for Trump, who's relying on Latino voters, particularly in battleground states with significant Puerto Rican populations. The Harris campaign, meanwhile, used the controversy in ads targeting Latino voters. On the other hand, Trump's running mate J.D. Vance countered the criticism by dismissing the outrage and encouraging Americans not to be easily offended. But could Puerto Rican voters end Trump's hopes at winning the presidency? Hinchcliffe defended his remarks as satire, accusing critics of lacking humor. In response, Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, emphasized that Trump's rallies reflect a divisive attitude, with Harris pointing to the event as an example of the Trump campaign's focus on grievances. President Biden also criticized Trump's event, calling it embarrassing and highlighting the importance of this election for national unity. Puerto Rican voters could play a pivotal role in determining the presidential election outcome, especially in key battleground states where margins are tight. Pennsylvania, with around 486,000 residents of Puerto Rican heritage, is particularly significant, as Trump and Harris are in a close race there. Even a small swing among Puerto Rican voters, motivated by recent controversies involving offensive remarks at a Trump rally, could be decisive in tipping Pennsylvania's electoral votes, essential for either candidate's victory. Georgia and North Carolina also host growing Puerto Rican populations, each with over 1% of the population identifying as Puerto Rican. Although these percentages may seem small, in a close race, such groups can wield substantial influence. In Florida, Puerto Ricans make up about 5.6% of the population, with over 1 million residents, positioning them as an influential voting bloc that could sway the state. The rally incident has amplified turnout efforts in Puerto Rican communities, with high-profile figures calling for political engagement. Given the tight national polling, these voters are strategically placed to impact the results in several closely contested states, potentially shifting the election's final outcome. Trump can't stand to lose more demographics after losing the Haitian vote. During a September rally, Trump repeated an unsubstantiated claim that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, were eating domestic pets, a rumor that began circulating on social media just a few months before the rally. Trump said immigrants in Springfield were eating dogs and the cats, though local officials confirmed that no credible evidence supported these claims. The rumor initially spread through social media and was promoted by Vance, who later backtracked, admitting the rumors might be false. The origin traces back to a Springfield city meeting in late August 2024, where a local influencer alleged, without evidence, that Haitian immigrants were killing local animals for food. Further, a separate incident in Canton, Ohio, involving a US-born woman accused of killing a cat, was also inaccurately linked to Haitian immigrants online. Despite police clarifying that the Canton incident was unrelated to immigrants, right-wing social media accounts, including Elon Musk's and the Republican House Judiciary Committees, continued to amplify the narrative. Springfield's immigrant population, including an estimated 20,000 Haitian newcomers, has revitalized parts of the city's economy, but has also sparked political debate. The Harris campaign adopted an unconventional approach with "Call Her Daddy." Shortly after Trump's episode of the Joe Rogan Experience went online, it became a viral sensation, with snippets from the episode circulating all over social media. In a way, the podcast might have been the best thing for his campaign, as it made him more in line with his target demographic, young male voters. Rogan also claimed that people from Harris's administration reached out to him after the fact, asking if the door was still open on Kamala sitting down with the podcaster. Rogan claimed that he shot down the offer, stating that Harris's campaign made a long list of demands he wasn't ready to comply with. In any case, Harris desperately needs more young male voters in her corner, and the Joe Rogan Experience would have done the trick. Trump's ingenious idea of sitting down for a podcast was, ironically, inspired by Harris herself. Please use the sharing tools found via the share button at the top or side of articles. There was CBS's 60 Minutes, ABC's The View, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and Howard Stern's radio program, all of which aired in the span of a couple of days. But one interview caught some by surprise: Harris's decision to appear on Call Her Daddy, one of the most popular podcasts in the US, with 5 million downloads a week. Cooper's podcast is currently listed as the second most popular podcast according to Spotify, trailing behind the Joe Rogan Experience. Kamala Harris was equally criticized for the podcast, by Trump as well. Traditional campaigning has been replaced with unconventional or more modern-day media campaigning, as the 2024 presidential hopefuls have podcasts lined up in the run-up to Election Day. Harris kicked things off with a feature on Call Her Daddy. While the move was a long time coming, especially considering the social landscape in the United States, the bigger question was, why did Harris choose Cooper's podcast over the more popular one, Joe Rogan's? The answer is relatively simple, given how Rogan has received much criticism from women's rights groups over his comments against women. That would be Harris's leading voter demographic. In any case, Harris did receive her fair share of criticism for going on Cooper's podcast, some of which came from Trump himself. In part, the criticism circled around how Harris had refused interviews with more credible outlets to go on Cooper's podcast, which built its space in the world of podcasts for being a sex and relationships podcast. About 48% of Call Her Daddy's audience are Democrats, 24% are Republicans, and 20% are independents, according to Edison Research. About a third of these listeners live in the South, with 20% in the Midwest. The conversations between Harris and Cooper strayed from the host's usual line of questioning. The two talked about everything from the political landscape escape to abortion rights and comments made by Republicans over Kamala not having any biological children. Harris administration's social media presence, including TikTok viral fame. The Democratic nominee's appearance on Call Her Daddy wasn't necessarily an unexpected move. Experts argued that if there was one facet where Harris had completely dominated her political rival, it would be social media. Harris administration kicked off her nomination by changing pictures on her social media accounts to Brat Green, a reference to Charlie XCX's viral song. Thereafter, Freedom by Beyoncé became the de facto anthem of the Harris campaign. At the October 2024 Houston rally, Beyoncé took center stage to endorse Harris herself. Furthermore, Harris's campaigning merchandise greatly resembles singer Chappell Roan's album art. A Harvard Institute of Politics youth poll found that 53% of young adults, ages 18 to 29, have seen a Harris meme online, with 34% saying it positively influenced their opinion of the candidate. The poll found Harris currently has a 31% lead over Donald Trump among likely voters in that age group. It's worth noting, however, that many young voters have expressed their dissatisfaction with Harris despite her aggressive social media campaigning. While the strategy was meant to promote more 25 and under voters to support her, it's also caused a divide online on if Harris will ever talk about more key issues surrounding young voters, such as rent skyrocketing and student loans. Saturday Night Live pokes fun at the Harris campaign's unconventional campaigning approach. Keeping up with election tradition, SNL announced its cast for the 2024 comedy skits centered around the race for the presidency. Maya Rudolph will be reprising her role as Kamala Harris, whereas James Austin Jones has formally replaced Alec Baldwin as the new SNL Donald J. Trump. Baldwin was previously caught in a heated exchange with Trump, who criticized his portrayal of him, calling it woefully inaccurate and exaggerated. It's worth noting, though, that the decision to replace Baldwin had less to do with Trump's criticism, and more so with the actor's legal troubles. In the 2020 presidential election, Rudolph delivered a memorable performance in the VP Fly debate Cold Open, a spoof of Harris's vice presidential debate against former Vice President Mike Pence and the lone fly that landed on Pence's head. Also in that season, Rudolph had a viral moment with actor Jim Carrey, who played President Biden after the election. The pair incorporated Carrey's signature Ace Ventura hand gesture, L is for loser. 2024's SNL kicked off with a parody of major TikTok influencers and trends. In the list was the Harris campaign's aggressive TikTok marketing. Ironically, Kamala HQ responded to the comedy sketch asking, "Is this us?" Celebrity endorsements for Trump so far, including the richest man in the world. Elon Musk has repeatedly denied being either right-leaning or left, instead calling himself a centrist. Although, historically, Musk has shared many left-leaning sentiments. That being said, he was a part of Trump's advisory board for climate control before formally distancing himself from the former president's administration when the Trump campaign pulled out from the Paris Agreement. Musk then became a vocal supporter of Joe Biden, but the support lasted only a short while. After Biden purposefully overlooked Musk when touring EV manufacturers across the country and similar such incidents, the richest man in the world became a vocal critic of the Biden administration. Still, Musk's only show of support for Trump before 2024 was when he took over Twitter, now X, and announced that previously banned accounts such as the former president's would be reinstated. Musk's formal endorsement came in July 2024, just a day after the Pennsylvania rally, where an attempt to assassinate Trump was made. Trump walked away with a nicked ear, but one fatality, besides the shooter, was reported. In the days following the attempt, several celebrities and political leaders showed support for Trump's speedy recovery and condemned the incident, including his political rivals. Musk, however, took the opportunity to announce that he would be formally supporting the president, going as far as pledging millions in campaign funds. This might be a good time to report that Musk never pulled through on that pledge, instead claiming that the media had grossly misrepresented the actual amount he was willing to donate. Celebrity endorsements for Harris aren't coming in slow either. Several celebrities rallied behind the potential Harris administration. Stars like Kerry Washington and Tony Goldwyn hosted segments, while Mindy Kaling, Eva Longoria, and Oprah Winfrey lent support with speeches and appearances. Beyoncé, a major endorser, donated significantly and authorized her song Freedom for Harris's campaign. Musical support extended to Lizzo, John Legend, Megan Thee Stallion, Stevie Wonder, Maren Morris, and Phineas, and Billie Eilish. Taylor Swift, Carole King, Bruce Springsteen, Willie Nelson, Nelson, and Charlie XCX also joined the cause. Actors including Sarah Jessica Parker, Anne Hathaway, Drew Carey, Leonardo DiCaprio, Andy Cohen, Ben Stiller, Cher, Mandy Patinkin, Mariska Hargitay, and Jennifer Lawrence publicly backed Harris. Hollywood icons George Clooney, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Sigourney Weaver, Jamie Lee Curtis, Jeff Bridges, Mark Hamill, and PNK also voiced support, alongside comic talents like Cecily Strong, Jason Bateman, and Nick Offerman. Podcasters and media figures Howard Stern and Alex Cooper joined authors Stephen King, Laura Lippman, Attica Locke, Michael Connolly, and Carl Hiaasen in endorsing Harris. Activist-minded figures like Ice-T, Michael Keaton, and sports entertainment crossover Dave Bautista encouraged voting. Prominent figures in the Geeks and Nerds for Harris fundraiser included LeVar Burton, Bill Nye, and Misha Collins. Lastly, political powerhouses Barack and Michelle Obama, Hillary and Bill Clinton endorsed Harris. The difference between the popular vote and the actual vote. It's worth noting that while Kamala Harris's team has been more aggressive where it comes to social media marketing, and Harris arguably has more celebrity endorsements backing her up, she's not winning the popular vote. If anything, results show that Trump and Harris are tied with 48% each, although some polls show the results leaning more toward Harris, by a slight margin in any case. The popularity vote was brought up before as well, again when Trump was running in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. The 2016 election resulted in a major upset for the Democratic side, as early polling results showed that Clinton was the favorite for presidency. However, a majority of the polls that showed Clinton as the winner were based on the popularity vote. There's a difference between popularity polls and actual polls, the area where Trump succeeded. In U.S. presidential elections, the popular vote reflects the total ballots cast by citizens nationwide, while the real vote, the Electoral College vote, determines the actual winner. Each state is allotted electoral votes based on its population, with a majority of 270 out of 538 needed to win the presidency. This system means that candidates can lose the popular vote, but still secure the presidency by winning key states with high electoral values, as seen in elections like those of 2000 and 2016. Critics argue that this process renders the popular vote a farce because a candidate can receive millions more votes than their opponent, yet lose the presidency if they lack sufficient electoral votes. Supporters, however, contend that the Electoral College ensures smaller states have a voice, preventing urban centers from solely determining national leadership. Still, many see the system as outdated and call for reform or direct election by popular vote. Polling results paint a different picture in the run-up to Election Day. Harris initially gained a slight lead in national polls, but the race has since tightened. National popularity, however, does not determine the election outcome in the U.S. because of the Electoral College system, which requires candidates to win at least 270 out of 538 electoral votes. This means that the focus is on battleground or swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, where small changes in support can sway the election. Polling averages attempt to adjust for potential errors by using strict quality measures. Though past polls have underestimated Trump's support, this introduces a level of uncertainty, especially as factors like voter turnout and demographic sampling affect results. Currently, Harris leads in several key states, while Trump is ahead in others, making the final outcome unpredictable. As both candidates campaign intensely across swing states, voters are poised to decide if the U.S. elects its first woman president or grants Trump a second term. Who do you think will win the most contested presidential election in modern-day history?